There is a heavy document that sat for hours on a mahogany desk inside Buckingham Palace, waiting for a single signature that would alter the British monarchy forever. For decades, the public believed that titles given at birth were permanent, woven into the very fabric of royal identity. Then, in a quiet room far removed from the glare of television cameras, the ink finally dried on a paper that could never be recalled. King Charles sat alone as the silence in his private study stretched thin. The formal order before him carried the full legal authority of the sovereign. It was a written command designed to do something no family argument had ever accomplished. With one stroke of a pen, Prince Harry's royal identity was not merely reconsidered or quietly set aside. It was formally taken away. Yet the most devastating truth behind the announcement was not the document itself. It was the patient, methodical force that had brought the king to this absolute point. Behind closed doors, Prince William had spent months crafting an unyielding constitutional case. He had built a wall of logic so complete that his father was ultimately left with no room to maneuver. The fallout was instant. The moment the formal decree was executed, a quiet shockwave moved through the corridors of the palace. A status carried since birth had vanished in a matter of seconds. An identity shared with the public for over 4 decades was systematically severed from the royal ledger. Charles did not move for a long time after the ink settled. His fingers remained tightened around the fountain pen as the weight of the moment pressed down upon him. A royal decree does not indulge in emotion. It operates with clinical precision. It stripped his younger son of the style and title of prince, leaving only blood and birthright intact, while removing every shred of official authority. The king had reached this breaking point after months of intense discussions with senior advisors and his elder son. They examined how royal titles affect public credibility, future state ceremonies, and the long-term stability of the crown. Yet no advisory committee could take the ultimate blame. Charles alone carried the burden of the decision. When the nib touched the paper, he acted strictly as sovereign, even as the father inside him resisted every letter. Across the ocean, Harry received the formal notification through a sealed official channel. At first, he assumed the correspondence concerned routine security updates or private travel arrangements. He broke the red wax seal, read the opening paragraph, and stopped breathing. The language was cold, exact, and entirely final. Hi viewers, do you believe King Charles was right to strip Harry of his title to protect the monarchy? Or did he go too far? Let me know your quick answer down in the comments right now. Then Harry's eyes drifted lower down the page, reaching the supporting institutional record. There, listed alongside dates of key constitutional meetings, was his brother's name. His expression hardened into pure ice. Quietly, in a room that had suddenly gone completely cold, he asked why the heir to the throne was documented on every single advisory page. The answer had been building in rooms Harry was never invited to enter. William had framed the entire issue to Charles, not as a personal feud, but as a direct threat to the authority of the crown. He argued that maintaining royal status without fulfilling royal duty created a permanent vulnerability, a title that could be weaponized outside palace control. One private briefing document contained the sharpest blow of all. It declared that the monarchy could no longer permit the prestige of the crown to exist without the responsibilities of the state. It was a phrasing almost identical to the private arguments William had been making behind closed doors for over a year. Harry realized in an instant that this was far more than a father's painful choice. Someone closest to the throne had guided the entire process, sentence by sentence, until all internal resistance collapsed. The decree bore the king's signature, but the hand guiding the pen belonged to the brother who would one day wear the crown. Long before a royal decree divided them on paper, the two brothers had already become complete strangers in everything but blood. One carried the immense weight of preserving an ancient institution. The other believed that very institution had sacrificed his personal happiness to protect its own survival. Between them stood a monarch torn down the middle, a father desperate to avoid losing his youngest child, yet increasingly convinced that personal affection could no longer override a constitutional crisis. William had stood outside his father's private study months earlier, silently rehearsing the arguments he had prepared. Anger pushed him forward, but a profound grief pulled him back. As heir, he was expected to shield the monarchy from every public challenge. Every interview, every private revelation published to the world had struck him twice. First as a future king, and then as a brother who still remembered when they had faced the world together. When William finally entered the study that afternoon, he knew the conversation would change their family dynamic forever. The monarchy was not merely a household, it was a constitutional system built around authority and duty. He warned his father that every unanswered challenge weakened the foundation he would one day inherit. Yet pressing Charles to act against his own son made him feel less like a protector and more like the man closing the final door. Harry sat beside Meghan as he read through the decree a second time. He reached the exact same paragraph, pushed the heavy pages away, and then immediately pulled them back, as though reading the text again might somehow alter the reality. Losing his military appointments had cut deep, but losing the title of prince felt entirely different. That single word bound him to his childhood, to his years of service, and to his mother's memory. Meghan watched as his initial fury gave way to a cold, heavy silence. Harry admitted that the decision felt like a deliberate attempt to erase his past, rather than simply manage his future. She quietly reminded him that an official paper could change how the palace addressed him, but it could never alter his bloodline, or the years the world knew him, simply as Diana's son. Still, he could not look past the detail that hurt the most. William had personally constructed the case. Charles had resisted the measure longer than anyone realized, having previously rejected 2 administrative proposals that sought to suspend the title temporarily. The king had feared even a limited measure would seem needlessly harsh. But William had not demanded a sudden outburst of anger. He had assembled a cold, undeniable case, showing how a princely title could be used to challenge the crown for decades to come. The final order began with a signature on a sunlit morning, but the true point of no return had occurred months earlier during a private gathering at Windsor. It was an evening when Harry's own words forced William to stop seeing him as a troubled brother and start viewing him as a permanent risk to the throne. Every royal rupture has one single moment that can never be undone. For the House of Windsor, that moment took place across a private dinner table, where a single threat caused the king to fall silent and left William staring at his brother with a new and chilling certainty. A private ledger detailing the emergency constitutional meetings held after that fateful dinner was placed inside a locked safe in the king's private secretary's office. Inside that ledger was a single handwritten entry from William, time-stamped hours before the formal paperwork was drafted, containing a final instruction that ensured Harry could never reclaim what was about to be taken. The private ledger locked inside the king's safe contained the precise, step-by-step timeline of how a quiet family dinner dissolved into a massive constitutional crisis. Charles had arranged the gathering at Windsor Castle as an informal, off-the-record evening. There were no cameras positioned outside. No palace press officers stood in the hallway. No private secretaries took formal minutes. It was deliberately designed to be a safe, enclosed space where a father and his 2 sons could finally confront their grievances away from the unrelenting scrutiny of the global media. Charles desperately needed those boundaries to hold. For years, every leaked private exchange, every televised interview, and every published accusation had chipped away at the moral authority of the crown. The public drama was turning intimate family grief into a global spectator sport, and the monarch knew the institution could not sustain this level of continuous friction. Harry arrived at Windsor expecting a straightforward discussion about his family's security arrangements, private travel logistics, and how often he would be permitted to visit his father. But Prince William entered the room with a far more strategic, cold-eyed intent. The heir to the throne was not interested in temporary fixes. He demanded an absolute, legally binding guarantee of confidentiality, a formal agreement ensuring that private family conversations, letters, and personal exchanges would never again be cited in memoirs, broadcast interviews, or public media projects against the palace. The atmosphere inside the dining room grew tense almost immediately. Harry accused the palace administration of systematically stripping away his military appointments and official patronages piece by piece, only to present his forced departure to the world as if it were a voluntary personal choice. Charles lowered his eyes, staring down at his untouched dinner plate. Hearing his youngest child suggest that his own father had deliberately erased his legacy hit somewhere deep and painful. But the king's complete silence only made the massive dining hall feel colder, darker, and more isolated. William finally stepped in, breaking the heavy silence with a calm, unyielding tone. He told his brother plainly that the privileges of being a prince could not exist without the daily duties attached to them. A royal title is not merely a piece of family heritage or a birthright label to be used at will. It gives public authority to every word spoken, and it directly connects the individual's actions to the sovereign himself. Harry pushed his heavy oak chair back sharply. The harsh screech of wood scraping against the ancient stone floor echoed loudly off the high walls. He stood up and declared that the heir to the throne did not own their shared birthright, did not own their childhood memories, and certainly did not own their mother's legacy. Then came the sentence that permanently altered the trajectory of the monarchy. Harry looked across the table and issued a direct warning. If the palace did not publicly correct what he viewed as a false narrative regarding his departure, he might eventually feel compelled to publish the entire cache of private correspondence surrounding the negotiations. Charles looked up in absolute shock. The room went dead silent. William did not raise his voice or lose his composure for a single second. He simply stared across the candlelit table at his younger brother, realizing in that chilling moment that private family history had officially been turned into political leverage against the crown. Harry walked out of the room before the dinner was even cleared. William remained behind, sitting in the quiet room with their father. The heir pointed out that the threat had crossed a dangerous red line. The title of prince was giving Harry the international standing and authority to launch attacks against the monarchy from outside its control. Charles refused to make a definitive ruling that night, but William pulled a detailed constitutional briefing from his leather jacket, placed it flat on the table, and quietly pushed it toward his father. The door at Windsor closed, but the war moved directly into the private study at Clarence House. Days later, the two brothers met face to face inside Clarence House, with no aides present, no secretaries taking notes, and no father sitting between them to soften the blows. William placed the constitutional briefing directly on the desk between them. He explained in rigid detail that every public use of the prince title blurred the line between personal celebrity and state authority. He made it crystal clear that he no longer trusted Harry to hold that rank without using it to undermine the stability of the institution. Harry didn't hear a legal argument. He heard a future king asserting total control. He accused William of using the weight of the crown to punish anyone who dared to challenge palace authority. Resentments that had built up over 2 decades spilled out into the open all at once. The confrontation reached its peak when William revealed a devastating detail from their father's private office. He admitted that Charles had asked him directly if he could guarantee that Harry would never release private letters or reveal confidential family exchanges in the future. William had looked their father in the eye and told him truthfully that he could not give that assurance. Harry realized in an instant that the meeting was not an attempt at brotherhood or reconciliation. It was a formal, calculated test. Resting inside the folder on the desk was a binding legal agreement. It offered Harry a choice. He could retain his princely style, but only if he signed strict, enforceable limits, preventing him from referencing private royal matters in any future media endeavors. Harry read through the first page, felt the trap closing in, pushed the document away, and flatly refused to sign. William closed the folder without a single trace of anger, looked his brother in the eye, and remarked that their father now had his definitive answer. The battlefield shifted back to the king's private quarters. Late into the night, Charles sat alone under the warm lamp of his study, reviewing the legal briefings line by line. He was caught in an agonizing conflict between his instinct as a protective father and his solemn oath as sovereign. Queen Camilla entered the room quietly, observing the deep physical and mental toll the decision was taking on him. She sat down, looked at her husband, and asked a simple, penetrating question. Was he making this momentous decision as a grieving father trying to hold on to his son, or as a reigning king protecting the long-term future of the throne? The king confessed that stripping Harry's title might permanently destroy any remaining hope of family reconciliation, but doing nothing carried an even higher price. It meant leaving an unresolved, volatile constitutional crisis, waiting for William the moment he eventually succeeded to the throne. William's final strategic argument had cut through all of Charles's lingering hesitation. The heir pointed out that after Charles was gone, any future public attack from Harry would no longer be viewed as a son criticizing his father. It would be framed as one royal prince publicly challenging the legitimacy of the reigning king. A senior palace advisor suggested a middle ground compromise, a temporary suspension of the title. This would pause Harry's official use of the rank without permanently revoking it, but William aggressively shot the idea down in a private memorandum. He argued that a temporary measure would only lead to endless media speculation, continuous public bargaining, and relentless pressure for a reversal. To the public, hesitation would not look like mercy. It would make the crown appear terrified of taking a firm stand. Charles finally reached across the desk, lifted the draft documents, and officially ordered the permanent decree to be prepared by the crown lawyers. Yet before the paperwork left his study to be processed, the king insisted on adding a single personal condition, a private, handwritten mandate that neither of his sons anticipated. A sealed document inside the Lord Chamberlain's private vault still holds that final instruction, time-stamped just hours before the world learned the truth, detailing a secret face-to-face encounter that was forced to happen before the decree became public record. The final sealed instruction kept inside the Lord Chamberlain's vault was executed on a cold, rain-slicked morning at Buckingham Palace. Before the formal press release could be broadcast across the globe, Charles demanded one final meeting with his younger son. It was a meeting stripped of courtiers, media managers, and royal advisors. For the first time in years, the sovereign and his son sat in a room with no public protocols separating them, only the quiet, heavy knowledge of what had already been signed. Charles had requested the encounter only hours before the announcement was scheduled to go live. All mobile devices were collected at the door. No private secretaries took notes. The king was not offering an avenue for appeal, as the constitutional decree was already legally binding and permanent. He was offering something far rarer within the confines of royal history, a personal explanation from a father who knew that legal justifications would never heal a deep emotional wound. Harry looked at his father across the silent study and asked the question he had carried since opening the sealed envelope. Had William forced his hand? Charles did not look away, nor did he offer a gentle lie. He admitted that the future king had challenged his hesitation, framed the existential danger to the throne, and urged him to act. Yet the monarch made one fact painfully clear. The signature at the bottom of the document was his own. The sovereign authority belonged to him alone, and the heavy historical burden of the choice would rest solely on his shoulders for the rest of his life. Harry absorbed the words in absolute silence. He quietly confessed that losing the title felt like losing the final piece of the boy who had walked behind his mother's coffin down the mall in 1997. The name of Prince had followed him through intense personal grief, military deployments in active combat zones, marriage, exile, and public fallout. Stripping it away did not feel like an administrative adjustment to state roles. It felt like an intentional attempt to reach backward into history and rewrite the child he had once been. Charles extended a hand toward his son, but stopped mid-motion when Harry remained completely still. The father admitted that he had delayed signing the order for months because he feared history would judge him as a cold sovereign who had punished his own child. But the power of the crown offered zero protection from parental guilt. He had ultimately acted only after accepting that avoiding the crisis today would simply dump the exact same painful burden into William's future reign. Then, Harry made a quiet revelation of his own. He admitted that his warning at the Windsor dinner regarding the private correspondence had been spoken out of sheer anger and desperation. He had never truly intended to publish family letters, yet he refused to apologize for demanding that his perspective be heard by an institution he felt had abandoned him. Charles replied softly that when private pain is transformed into public pressure, truth and threat become impossible to separate. The meeting ended without a dramatic outburst, without an embrace, and without forgiveness. Harry stood up, picked up his father's handwritten personal letter, and placed it inside his coat pocket. He walked out of the room, leaving the palace behind forever. By sunrise, the private conflict belonged to the entire world. Major television networks interrupted scheduled programming. Royal correspondents crowded outside the iron gates of Buckingham Palace. Headlines across news outlets blared the same historic phrase: Harry was no longer a prince. Some public commentators praised the monarchy for finally establishing clear boundaries and protecting the integrity of the crown. Others condemned the decision as a ruthless act of a father bowing to the demands of his heir. Buckingham Palace issued a tightly controlled, clinical statement confirming the king's decision. The wording deliberately framed the change as a constitutional separation, a formal removal of state authority from an individual no longer serving the crown, rather than a personal rejection of a son. The palace moved with ruthless speed. Official websites were updated within minutes. State registries were altered. Protocol officers received strict orders that Harry could no longer be addressed or introduced by the title he had carried since birth. William watched the breaking news reports alone in his office at Windsor. When Catherine entered the room, a television commentator was describing William as the cold, strategic mastermind behind his brother's public downfall. The future king quietly admitted to his wife that preserving the future of the crown had cost him whatever fragile thread of trust remained between the two brothers. Catherine gently reminded him that leadership often demands heavy sacrifices, but William answered that institutional victory feels entirely hollow when the person defeated shared your childhood. The full weight of the decision was laid bare days later during a major state ceremony at St. George's Chapel. The official order of precedence, the ancient, ranked list showing precisely where members of the royal family stand and sit during public events, had been rewritten. Where Prince Harry's name had stood for decades, there was only an empty space. No name card marked his former seat. No formal announcement was made to address his absence. The physical gap carried an unyielding message to the world. Royal birth alone could no longer grant public authority without continuous service to the institution. Charles arrived at the chapel wearing his full ceremonial robes. He opened his program, and his eyes drifted to the spot where his younger son should have been standing beside his brother. His fingers lingered over the paper for a long moment, but he gave no command to alter the protocol. Sovereign duty had conquered personal hesitation, but it had brought zero comfort to the father. He had successfully shielded the crown, but the victory had cost him his family. William took his place directly beside the king, his posture straight, his face entirely unreadable. He had secured the structural integrity of his future reign. He had ensured that royal authority could not be challenged from the outside by someone wearing a royal title. Yet he fully understood the permanent personal price he had paid. Harry would never again see him as a brother. He would forever see him as the heir who stripped away his identity. Harry responded to the historical shift, not with an angry outburst or a televised interview, but through a short, highly restrained statement issued by his private office in California. He acknowledged the legal reality of the sovereign's decree and confirmed he would no longer style himself as a prince. But he added that no administrative paper, no legal decree, and no constitutional separation could ever alter his military service, his personal history, or the eternal bond he shared with his late mother. His quiet restraint brought an end to the constitutional battle, far more decisively than open warfare ever could. He accepted the reality of his new life outside the royal sphere. Charles accepted the heavy burden of his legacy, and William accepted that protecting the throne meant sacrificing the brother he had once promised to protect. The British monarchy moved forward into a new era with its legal authority fortified, its boundaries defined, but its core family permanently fractured. A constitutional triumph bought through the quiet, lingering heartbreak of a king and his two sons. Thank you for watching this episode of Royal Family Series. If this deep dive into palace intrigue and constitutional power struggles kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe right now so you never miss a single chapter of royal history. Next time, we uncover a devastating secret hidden deep within the private Balmoral archives for over 40 years. A newly unsealed letter written by Queen Elizabeth II, just days before her passing, reveals a secret pact made between the late Queen and Prince William. An agreement that changes everything we thought we knew about the line of succession and the ultimate fate of the House of Windsor. You cannot afford to miss a single second of what was discovered inside that vault. We will see you in the very next video.